Next month marks the 50th anniversary of the National Hurling League final between Kilkenny and Tipperary, one of the most controversial clashes in GAA history, writes Edna McAvoy. Michael Walsh was 7 years of age. Old enough to realize something was wrong, not old enough to realize exactly what or why. All he knew was that his daddy had been suspended by the GAA. It was a very strange time, he says, recalling the events of half a century ago. There was tension around the place. But at home it was very low-key. My parents made sure of that. The record books state that Tipperary won the 1968 National Hurling League home final against Kilkenny by 3-9 to 1-13, having led by 7 points at the interval following goals by Sean McLaughlin and Jimmy Doyle. The record books do not state what happened in the first half of the match. For most of the spectators in Croke Park, the result of the game amounted almost to an afterthought. The real story lay in the enmity, the lawlessness and the poison. Toxic, according to Pat Henderson, the Kilkenny centre-back. To view this media, you need an HTML5 capable device or download the Adobe Flash Player. Sickening, agrees Donny Nealon, the Tipperary midfielder. It was the only day in my career I felt a little bit afraid on the field. The game, according to the Nenagh Guardian, was marred somewhat by 3 or 4 minutes of dirty hurling in the second quarter. Both Len Gaynor and Ollie Walsh were felled by careless blows, blows which could have resulted in more serious injury. But nobody was as outspoken, or as outraged, as John D. Hickey in the Irish Independent. Hurling took a beating. 8 scandalous minutes. Acts of violence that must have sickened every spectator of the 27,892 attendants with a shred of respect for the precepts of law and order, never mind the canons of good sportsmanship. Would be punished with a punitive sentence if perpetrated in civilian life instead of on a sports field. We have, I am convinced beyond all doubt, only Providence to thank that the frightening actions we saw did not have consequences that would startle us out of our complacency. What Hickey witnessed had not fallen out of the sky. Does the backstory really have to be told at this stage? Kilkenny's inability to beat Tipperary in a national final between 1922 and 1966. The Kilkenny for the hurlers, Tip for the men syndrome. The incident in the New York hotel elevator in the mid-1960s when a couple of players from each side descended in such glowering silence that the American couple between them couldn't wait to get out. The worm turning at last with Kilkenny's victories in the 1966 National League and 1967 All-Ireland finals. The gradual discovery that the liberation of the men in stripes, instead of lancing the boil, merely increased the build-up of pus. The 1967 league encounter at a rambunctious Nowlan Park in front of a crowd of 20,000, with 36 frees awarded in the course of the hour, Mackie McKenna refusing to go anywhere near the Kilkenny Square on the grounds that Pat Dillon was sharpening his hurley in there, Dillon and Babs Keating sent off near the end and one of the newspapers sniffing afterwards that it would have been infinitely better for the image of the game of hurling if the match had never been played. The ensuing All-Ireland final, which Kilkenny finished without the services of both Eddie Kerr, who would hurl again, and Tom Walsh, who wouldn't ''T. The last thing any of us needed was another big game against Kilkenny, Babs Keating would declare in his autobiography. The powder keg was ready to explode. On May 12, 1968 it did. While the precise sequence of events is hazy, the following is not in dispute. Eddie Kerr was struck twice by John Gleeson. Len Gaynor was struck by Kerr. Ollie Walsh was struck by John Flanagan. Gleeson was struck by, farcically, the Kilkenny team Dr. Kieran Cuddihy who, losing the rag after Kerr had been felled the second time, ran in, clocked Gleeson and was ordered out the gate by the referee, Jerry Fitzgerald of Limerick. Here is an account of Gaynor/Kerr in the words of the latter, who had been stretched on a few occasions by then. He raced into the centre to meet a ball arriving behind the centre-back. I came in late to tackle and as I was arriving I saw that he was going to strike directly off his hurl rather than take it in his hand. I pulled behind, catching Len behind the ear with the lower handle of my hurl. This resulted in one of the many scuffles that took place in that game. He arose bloodied and bandaged to play a stormer. The real flashpoint, however, was Walsh/Flanagan. One photograph showed Flanagan, On the extreme right of the shot, departing the scene of the crime, Jim Treacy and Pa Dillon were looking in Flanagan's direction, with Dillon about to make a beeline for him. Sean McLaughlin was in the center.